Oi, oi, it's your boy, Slacky J, Fights Gone By podcast, coming at you on the 16th of November, Monday. And we had some fights over the weekend. We actually had a fair few fights. There were 3 big events I can think. Oh, no, there was one event as well, which I haven't caught up on. So I shouldn't even have said it, because now you're going to expect it, and I didn't even watch it. Though I did watch the finish of John Lineker versus Kevin Bellignon. Kevin Bellignon been my boy for a while, because he's got a rat tail, and he can't wrestle, but he somehow beat Bibiano Fernandez exclusively using back kicks. If you've never seen that fight, I think it's their second fight. I think they fought 4 times and Bibiano beat him 3. I can't remember. But if you've never seen the second fight where Kevin Bellignon decisions Bibiano Fernandez, one of the best bantamweights in the world, probably ever, certainly the best outside the UFC, or one of. And it's not like he flukes him with the back kick either. It's like multiple, probably like 24 back kicks over the course of 5 rounds. And then at the time I was like, oh my God, these Team Leke boys, they've got it down. They've learned to wrestle. And ever since they have done shit against wrestlers. So for one fight, Kevin Bellignon could stuff the takedowns of a much bigger, more skilled grappler. And now he can't for some reason. But yes, John Lineker melted him with body shots. But that's John Lineker. He's going to be fun wherever he goes. Strange cut by the UFC at the time, but then on the other hand, was it? I mean, the guy misses weight constantly. Why not go to somewhere like One where they've worked out weight cutting by not actually weighing you? Allegedly. I believe you step on a platform and Matt Hume guesses your weight in bushels. Unless you're fighting against Bibiano or DJ, and then he goes, get in the sauna, you slag. That place is just rife with conflicts of interest, but never mind. They put on decent fights from time to time, especially in the Muay Thai parts of their cards. But the thing that sort of firstly, new audio setup. That's what you're probably hearing now. A little bit, considerably better. Bought a new mic, bought a new mixer, set up some soundproofing foam. It's sort of just stacked at the moment, and I tried to blue tack it in place. Turns out that doesn't stick to it. But I'm gonna sort out some hardboard and glue it all in and drill it onto the wall and stuff. But hopefully you're getting a little bit less reverberations off the wall around my computer and stuff. So no more stack of cushions to deal with the sound from outside. And yes, I have noticed people telling me that I sound like I'm talking into a cardboard tube. It's also the first time I've actually recorded myself with headphones on. I mean, I've always had the ability to do that, but I was just like, nah, I won't bother. Now I'm actually monitoring my sound as I record. But yes, that's why I wasn't able to do much last week. I just sort of, I got out my Lopez versus Lomachenko piece, which was pretty overdue, to be honest, in that I wasn't going to do one because there was a lot of arguing over the results and stuff, and also there was just other stuff going on in MMA. We had Khabib versus Gaethje and stuff, but there was some really interesting stuff in that fight that I wanted to talk about, so I put out an article on that, and it was all about digging someone out of the outside angle. If a southpaw starts stepping down the outside of your lead foot, and that's where Lomachenko does a lot of damage. He lines up his left hand beautifully, and he can start doubling up on steps and things. He'll keep people turning and keep landing good left hands down the center or to the body. And Lopez did an amazing job with 4 different strategies. Dropping away, pushing Lomachenko out. Used a beautiful pivoting right uppercut, which was the really interesting one because punching on the pivot is very, very hard to do, and he was doing it really well. And then holding, of course, is always an option too. So if you're a Patreon boy and you've not read that piece, go have a read of it because it's undoing a Southpaw 101 strategy, which Lomachenko is very, very good at it. He's probably you're getting a lot of Southpaws who. Firstly, no one is circling just one way. It's very easy for me to go Southpaw 101, step outside the lead foot, line up the rear hand, which is a very sound method. But it's sort of it's you noticed this back in the day, advice for fighting Southpaws because they were rarer was a lot more one size fits all. It was just sort of don't consider what that Southpaw does, just consider him as a Southpaw, and Obviously, that gets complicated when you start fighting southpaws who have a great right hook instead of a great left hand, or both, even worse. I remember reading Gene Tunney's A Man Must Fight, and he basically, I don't know if he ever fought any good southpaws, but he basically said in his book, I'll never have trouble with a southpaw anyway, because basically, if I fight a southpaw, it just lines up my right hand better. Gene Tunney, you're a very clever man, but have you not realised that their power hand is also lined up in exactly the same way? Surely, yeah. In some regards, it raises the stakes of each engagement because you can rather than your lead hand lining up with their centre line, both of your rear hands are more easily brought into line with the centre line of the opponent. But yeah, it's mirrored. So I don't know what Gene Tunney was on about there, but he did like to just spew some bullshit sometimes. He had enormous confidence in the things he said. But yes, nobody circles just one way. You're seeing more and more guys circle to the inside of the lead foot, but Lomachenko is very, very good at circling to the outside of the lead foot, and Teofimo Lopez took that away from him and made him fight. He got him back out to range, and then he hit him with 1-2s, which, he wasn't connecting a whole lot. He was just throwing the long power punches, long hard power punches to take advantage of his reach and height, and Lomachenko never got into the kitchen to do his two-handed hitting. Until very late in the fight, when he made a brawl of it, came in head on. But yes, if you want to read a thing about taking away the finesse of one of the most finesseful boxers in the world right now, or maybe ever, definitely go read that. And then the other thing I did last week, I put out a new Filthy Casuals guide. It was more of a Filthy Casuals quickie, but it was on Alexander Volkanovski, and the audio on that was shocking. So that's I really got pushed over the edge to buying new kit then. Yeah, go watch that one because it's good fun, shifting right hooks and everything about them. I was going to do like a whole series on shifts. I might still do that. Yeah, they are good fun, and we don't really talk about. I think I don't like to do them because they are so. It's a big move. It's an obvious thing. It's something you can point to, like that's his special move. Whereas I try to look at things that are a little bit more nuanced generally, or just provide a little bit more nuance when I'm doing matchups and things. But yeah, I mean, it's easy content and people seem to enjoy it. And I get to play with diagrams and stuff too. So yeah, maybe do that. What was I talking about? Fucking fights this week. The reason that I'm pattering is because they weren't great. And the best part was John Kavanagh, who I have a good degree of respect for, and Zane Simon, who I also have a good degree of respect for. Zane Simon was like, I'm probably not going to cover this card. And, he works as an analyst and someone who produces content about fights and fighters. He's not interviewing people and relying on them for clicks. And John Kavanagh's just like retweet to his minions. If you ever see the John Kavanagh reply sections, they are incredibly cringe. In fairness, John Kavanagh himself once said in reply to someone saying, "Oh, is that Ben Shapiro I hear in the back of your open workout?" He was like, "Yes, I like to hear him destroy people verbally as I'm preparing to destroy people physically." He's also a huge follower of the Dilbert guy for some reason. But yeah, he just decided to make an example of Zayn for saying the fights didn't look that great this weekend by being like, "Remember who, blah, blah, blah. If you're a young fighter coming up on this card, remember never to speak to this man." And you're just like, what? Why? Why are we pretending that there aren't cards that are really lazily put together or just fall apart? Like this one had about 10 cancelled fights, a lot of them due to weight cuts, which Paul Felder had a good yell about on the card. But yeah, this is why I love not doing interviews with people and not having to rely on other people to produce content. When we're just talking about fights, I'm allowed to say that fights are bad. I'm allowed to say that cards coming up look kind of weak. I'm allowed to say, $60 used to get you more than this when we're looking at next weekend's pay-per-view, I appreciate there's some people who consider that moaning, but I've also been told by a lot of people that they appreciate me not just saying, "Oh, great fights about every card," because if everything's a great fight, nothing is. I can't. When I tell you that I really enjoyed something, it normally means something because I don't just enjoy crap. So yeah, John Kavanagh decided to get crucified on that hill, or crucify Zayn on that hill, and then the card was pretty shite, to be honest. The prelims were shockingly dull. There were not a single finish on the prelims. I think there were 1-2 finishes on the main show. Strickland got one, and who else did? To be honest, I'm not even going to talk about these fights much, but Sean Strickland was good fun, and that was his second win in 2 weeks. He fought Jack Marshman. I'd skipped that one previously because I don't like Jack Marshman. I saw it went to decision. Don't not like Jack Marshman personally. I don't like his style a lot of the time. But yeah, people told me to go back and watch that, and it was one of the strangest fights I've seen. Sean Strickland has the most bizarre trash talk you ever heard. He's like encouraging Jack Marshman. He's got the kind of Asperger's that makes you good at fighting, or Asperger's as you call it in the US. Very awkward guy, but then he's awkward in his style too. Like he places his left hand on his sternum, which you don't see really anyone doing, and then jabs from there. And basically every jab he throws for the first minute or so, the opponent jabs him at the same time, and he gets his head snapped back. And then at some point it just turns, and he's landing 2 punches, 3 punches, and the opponent's landing 1. But he's great fun, and his opponent, who was it, Brendan Allen, he was trying to go forward and create, pressure and keep Strickland from piling up the damage, because if you've got a volume puncher, best to just get on them and make them work to your pace by making them flee. But yeah, he got hammered. Got hammered a couple of times on one leg too, which was a bit of a theme this weekend. Who was it? Al Hassan got murdered. Low kicking coming forward, ate a right hand up the middle, died. And then I think the same thing happened to Aaron Pico's opponent. Got hit with an overhand on one leg, fell down and died. And then the main event of the Bellator card, which actually was good. Shout out to Pitbull. And we'll get into that was a big sigh there, sorry. We'll get into the details of Pitbull in the UFC and all that stuff. But his fight this weekend was really good fun. Pedro's Carvalho, I was quite looking forward to this fight. I'd seen, I think, most of Pedro Carvalho's fights, and I think he is, he's flawed, but he's exciting, and I appreciate the way that he fights. He's another example of just how much pressure gets done. He has sort of the Kyoji Horiguchi problem, where I'd noticed in basically all his fights, even when he was overwhelming the opponent and it looked like he was the much better fighter, he still ended up with them on his back at some point. You're going, oh, that's not great. But in this one, he puts pressure on people, but you can see the difference. And the parallels are always going to be drawn between him and McGregor. And there were people calling him like a discount McGregor and things like that. The parallels are, one, because he fights out of SBGI with John Kavanagh. And the other one is that because he's very tall for the weight class, big for the weight class, and he goes forward and tries to put the pressure on people, size bully them. And really, you see the difference between Conor and him, because Conor goes forward but stays ready on the counter. He's on a hair trigger waiting to go backwards and fire over the top. Pedro Carvalho is going forwards to just make stuff happen and to hurt people going forwards. And you saw this with the Pitbull fight. He comes in and he kept walking up into low kicks. The sort of pressure fighting where you're not quite aware of what can be coming back. When you watch McGregor, it's always long kicks into the body, front kicks into the body, or long snapping left hands. And he's always, always, always thinking about what's coming back, because I think part of that is because he relies so much on what is coming back. His best shots are often counter shots. So the more he can get his opponent to lash out, the better it is for him. Whereas Carvalho kind of just wants to overwhelm people. But a couple of times he steps up into low kicks, walking in to low kicks, particularly above the knee, on a shorter opponent. He's crowding a shorter opponent, and there's just no need. He's not using his length at all. But he steps up into these low kicks, and Pitbull just smacks him in the face with a right hand or a left hook, a couple of different times. And then it was good left hook to right straight, finish the fight. Pitbull, great counterpuncher. Bit of a karate boxer. Started working with a guy called Mano Santana, who ended up working with Henry Cejudo and introducing him to that point fighty sort of style. But he always had a great left hook too. But the standard Pitbull procedure is to win your fight in Bellator and immediately say you want to fight Volkanovski or whatever, or that you're the best in the world. I think he's got a good case for being one of the better featherweights in the world, and I would love to see him in with the best featherweights in the world. But anyone who's giving you he could be the best featherweight in the world stuff, even if you are super butthurt about Volkanovski beating Holloway the second time, or getting the decision rather, a single win over Holloway and a win over Jose Aldo is better than anything Pitbull's done in his career so far. So, basically Pitbull is there's a lot of this, like, I had some goober talking to me about, like, why don't the UFC just co-promote? And you're like, well, Pitbull and Bellator bring nothing to that. You know, you're legitimizing a competitor for no reason. Can you not see why they wouldn't do that? It's just terrible business. Especially as Bellator was circling the drain anyway. They're down to, like, averaging 300,000 viewers, and when Rebney was in charge, they averaged like 800,000 across their events for the year. They're basically, like, their new strategy is clout chasing by being like, the UFC's scared to co-promote us. You're like, no, they're not really. Because anyone who is watching the UFC events, and the UFC events have had, like, tailing off viewerships over recent years, but anyone who's watching UFC is watching Bellator. Anyone who's watching Bellator is probably watching UFC. It's just that the UFC viewership is much larger. You get nothing. There's like 4 people in the world who don't watch the UFC and watch Bellator, and 2 of them are Team to the Junk's personalities. But, you know, there's nothing to be gained out of that co-promotion. So basically, Pitbull's just like taking easier fights in Bellator. Maybe he gets paid more, but the people who assume he does, why? As far as I know, his pay isn't disclosed. And most UFC fighters' pay is not disclosed now because they lobbied Nevada to not disclose the pay. Which is shit, yes, it's bullshit, and I think every fighter's pay should be disclosed all the time, so that they actually get together and unionize, or form a fighters association or whatever. But there's a difference between being paid more by Bellator and being paid a good amount to fight much easier fights. And I suspect some of these guys, that's the case, or has been the case in the past. Why would I take 250,000 show money when I could take 150,000 show money but fight easier opposition, you know? But yes, Pitbull looked great. And in the co-main event, Amosov versus Staley. Amosov's always been good fun. And they were hyping the hell out of his longest winning streak in MMA now. Again, not over names that you need to be concerned about, but recently he's been fighting much better opposition. And Staley, just a monstrous wrestler. Apparently he turned down a Harvard scholarship to fight in MMA, which is brave. There was someone, is it Tywin Claxton? No, who is it? Someone from Bellator who follows me on Twitter, but it seems like a cool guy, but he was just putting up a post about how he turned down a role as a coder or a developer or something like that for £250,000 a year, dollars a year, in order to chase his dream in Bellator. And I was like, oh man, you could chase your dream doing it part-time, I promise. Just work 2 years at that rate and get 500,000, or that minus tax in the bag. Get yourself a nest egg and then win your Bellator world title. You don't hit your Bellator prime until your 40s anyway. But yes, gave up a Harvard scholarship apparently for wrestling. For MMA, did Logan Staley, and he's Robbie Lawler's protege. But yeah, his hands ain't sharp. Certainly he doesn't have confidence in them, is what is the main issue. Like, he's working with Hooft and Robbie Lawler, but if you could get him in the same mindset as like Vicente Luque, who his whole thing is go forward, and the moment that they start punching at your face, you slip inside and throw the right hand over the top, and if you get hit, you throw the left hook afterwards. That's Vicente Luque's whole game plan, but he knocks out so many guys that way. Logan Staley with offensive counterpunching would be a very, very dangerous fighter. But as it was, he was diving in low, picking up these singles, coming up on them, trying to finish them with like the high leg position or switching off to the high crotch. The amount of energy he was using on each of these, I was going, yeah, this guy's not lasting 3 rounds, because this was the first round he was doing this. And then, wouldn't you know, in the third round, he's still doing it. He looked knackered halfway through the first round, but he's just doing the same with his mouth open. That's the only difference. So incredibly impressive. But Amosov really handled himself well, defended the takedowns well, and got a couple of dominance positions, but then so did Staley at several points. And there was a really nice one where I put a gif of it on my Twitter, but Staley came in, dived in low for a single, popped his head outside and came up on a high crotch, tried to crack Amosov down to a hip, gets rolled over the top, but lands in what is called the crackdown position, which is where you basically, if you grab the high crotch, which is a single with your head on the outside of the hip, and then you put that hip to the floor, so you're basically like between the opponents, your shoulder is in their crotch, and your head's like on the outside. I swear I have to explain the high crotch every week. I probably don't need to, you know what it is by now. But yeah, the crackdown position like that. And it's sort of like a race between the guy on the bottom, because he's getting towards your back or the crucifix, and the guy on top has to sort of retreat to pass the guard. He has to go back. He's almost past the guard one way, but he has to go back in front of the guard and then pull his arm out or go all the way around to the other side. And Staley tries to run around and pass it like Jake Shields used to do all the time. And as he's moonwalking out of Amosov's guard, Amosov snaps on an anaconda choke and threatens to finish, and they roll out. And it's just brilliant. It was a really nice counter to trying to moonwalk out of someone's guard from the crackdown control. I believe Amosov won. He's still on his streak. It was a close fight, and really, I think, spoke more to the potential of Logan Staley than anything else. And then there was a decent fight before that between Sanchez and, is it Whiteshill? At any rate, I bet on all the favourites that my bookie would let me, which was only those three, as it turned out. They didn't carry any of the other fights. But I won £5. Not bad. Just bet on all the favourites, all in on Coca. Then there was some boxing going on. Kell Brook versus Terence Crawford. Might do something about that later on. Standard Kell Brook looked good until he didn't. Just like he did against Golovkin. You went, oh man, his speed's giving Golovkin some problems. And then, end the fight. But the other one was that headbutt that caused a bit of a palaver. This lad, Andrew Maloney, is he Australian? Can't remember what he was. But he was fighting, was it Franco? And he hit him on the eye in the first round and it swelled up. And Russell Mora said illegal headbutt. And then the second round ended, and I think they called it off, and they were like, well, because it was an illegal headbutt and we haven't reached round 4, we can't go to the scorecards, so no contest, even though Maloney was boxing him up at that point. And the crew were like, it wasn't an illegal headbutt, we checked the replay, and the referees and the Nevada Commission are allowed to check the replay, but the commissioner, Bob Bennett or whatever his name is, and Russell Mora never opted to check the replay at all. The main thing is that, like, back at the start of the lockdown, I remember seeing Russell Mora reffing a fight, and I was like, oh my god, Russell Mora is still reffing fights. Because if you don't remember, he fought, was it Agbeko versus... It was Agbeko versus... I can't remember. But this lad kept getting hit in the dick about 30 times, and Russell Mora didn't see any of them. And then he went to a knee off getting hit in the crotch, and Russell Mora went, and started counting. And people lost their shit. And basically... The Nevada State Athletic Commission's response was, can't believe this happened. Well, he won't do a main event for a little while. Because, I mean, if you are one of the, 7 people who are Nevada's officials, Robert Byrd, Adelaide Byrd, whoever else is left, if you're one of those guys, why not just sell out and abuse your position? Because their defense, they're so terrified of admitting that they have a problem with corruption or incompetence that they just say everything is like a mistake. Everything's down to incompetence. And they'll just retrain you by having you watch a video or something like that. They won't let anyone new in. They just use the same old losers over and over again. Nevada fucking sucks. We all knew that anyway. The only commission that isn't a complete joke is the New York State Athletic Commission, but then they keep cancelling fights because they're over cautious, and then people hate that, and they're like, what a joke commission. There was also a KSW card. There was a KSW card on as well, which didn't have an awful lot going on, but Thomas Nokun picked up a nice win. He's an interesting guy, kind of sloppy on the feet, but he did knock the guy down with punches and then finished him with a rear naked choke. And then Roberto Soldic, who I did a Filthy Casuals guide on a little while ago, he won in the main event against I can't remember his name, but he has the most KSW fights of anyone, and it was like watching a young Crow Cop. I've drawn comparisons between Soldic and Crow Cop before. I did a Filthy Casuals guide to him where I talked about both and how similar they are, and how they use that southpaw double attack. And it was like watching Crow Cop at his best. The guy just shelled up, and he was just sneaking in quick, fast punches and fast kicks. And eventually, he fell down a couple of times, but eventually fell down for good. So worth a watch if you haven't, if you're reeling from the lack of interesting fights this weekend. Roberto Soldic versus whoever it was. Well worth your time. But then you had the UFC event, which was not great. And we'll go straight into the main card because nothing worth writing home about on the undercard. Kay Hansen lost to Corey McKenna. A little back and forth fight. Sean Strickland versus Brendan Allen, we've already talked about. Chaos Williams versus Al Hassan, we've already talked about all that happened in that 30-second fight. So then it was Rafael dos Anjos versus Paul Felder. And, people were... This got fight of the night, and people were talking about how great it was, but Yes, I'm impressed by Paul Felder coming in at short notice. They said he hadn't been in an MMA gym in 4 months. This is a guy who was talking about retiring, and he was training for a triathlon, and you really saw that in his physique. He made the weight on short notice, and I suspect a lot of that because he's been massive in the past. I suspect a lot of that is because he's lost some muscle mass to do the long distance endurance stuff. But this one really just hammered home to me that I'm bored of seeing the best we can scrape together. I would love Rafael dos Anjos versus Paul Felder, but I don't want the caveat that Paul Felder's not been training. I want Rafael dos Anjos versus Paul Felder because that's the fight we're doing, and that's not to besmirch Paul Felder or Rafael dos Anjos. That's just how I'm feeling now. I'm kind of bored of everything being done under the last minute circumstances. What I want to see, and this is what I've always said about everything, is that I always want to see the best fight the best, and for each of them to be able to prepare specifically for their opponent. There's a huge fighting people at the last minute is ballsy and awesome, and that's how Conor McGregor basically cemented his place and rose through the rankings so quickly. He made himself a company guy and was like, I will step in, I will fight anyone whenever, replace the opponent, I'll still take him. And then the moment that he got the title, he was like, nah, I'm not doing that anymore. But I don't want to see that. I want to see Paul Felder when now he says he's not going to quit fighting, which is fantastic, but I want to see him after a training camp against Rafael dos Anjos. That would be entertaining. This one was just yep, Rafael dos Anjos is all over him. Isn't Paul Felder doing well for a guy who came in on short notice and made the weight in 5 days and hasn't trained in an MMA gym in months? And he was doing, he had some nice ideas. He was getting beaten to the punch by dos Anjos. He was getting lanced with left straights and good left body kicks. And he was trying to come back with elbows and knees, try and stick to the guy, capitalize on his faster strikes with heavier strikes if you can catch him waiting around. But then he was getting pushed to the fence and taken down with the short takedowns and things. And that's something that Rafael dos Anjos has always been good at. Get him to the fence, do the short level change on the hips and pull the legs out on the double. It was weird because now everyone's like, dos Anjos clearly not washed, but he beat a top 10 lightweight, but Paul Felder was effectively semi-retired at this point. I guess what I'm saying is that I'm struggling to take much away from it. It was more, there was that one awful scorecard, but it was more like the UFC and everyone involved was like, see, we managed to get a fight together. And that was the lesson. It wasn't like, damn, what a great fight. And again, not to take anything away from either fighter, they're both great, and they did exactly what they said they'd do and were there to do. It's just... yeah, fatigue with these lockdown cards. And I mentioned it earlier, but someone put up a picture of all the cancelled or fizzled fights on, mainly cancelled fights on Tapology. And it's 8 fights cancelled. And Paul Felder had a good moan about weight cutting, making weight, because half these guys didn't make weight. And you're like, what? There's about 3 of them where they pulled out because they weren't going to make weight, or they pulled out because they got ill from the weight cut. And you're just going, well, yeah, no, if you had all the time to make the weight, the one thing that you can control while you're not able to do normal gym hours and shit like that, and everything else isn't perfect, is what you eat. There's no reason you should be missing weight unless you're a last-minute replacement. And the fight we lost was Rafael dos Anjos versus Islam Makhachev, which would have been Rafael dos Anjos against another guy who wanted to wrestle him. I was working on some Islam Makhachev stuff in the week, so it's kind of annoying. We were going to talk about the casting punch revisited, which is always a thing that I thought was treated with mysticism that wasn't really necessary. But people went on and on about Fedor doing it, but the guy to look at was Matt Lindland. Lindland used to come in with a swinging overhand left, where he'd hit the guy with his wrist behind their neck, and then he'd come in on the clinch. And Islam Makhachev does that an awful lot. And the great thing about it is you come in with it, and if they move back, you can change it into a collar tie and do some hitting with your lead hand uppercut. Holding with the rear hand and hitting with the lead hand uppercut was a Sandy Sadler favourite, and you see Islam Makhachev do that a lot. It's interesting because, when you see a dirty boxing clinch, it's always, say, left collar tie, left foot forward, and you're hitting with the right uppercut, because that's your boxing stance. But what Sadler had great effect doing, and what Makhachev has been doing in some of his UFC fights, is gripping with right foot forward, left hand grabs behind the head and right uppercut, or left foot forward, right hand grabs behind the head, left uppercut. So your lead, so your uppercut's coming from like directly over your lead foot. We always talk about how hard it is to, or how hard a good lead uppercut is. You see guys doing like a side on one, like a flinging it upwards or an up jab sort of thing. But the lead uppercut in the same way you would throw a rear uppercut, very tricky to do because you have to get your feet sort of level to drive off the floor like that. But taking that collar tie with the rear hand makes it quite viable. But anyway, yeah, that's a taster of what you didn't get. But we'll do it. We'll talk about it at some point. Probably won't write it this week because I'm writing Valentina Shevchenko stuff in anticipation of this weekend's card. Anyway, these fights were not great. Let's do some questions, and then we'll get out of here for today. Hey, Street Jaxus, the man whose competition is even further behind him than Valentina Shevchenko's in the 125-pound division. Do you see any way for RDA to ever get close to championship contention again? Is there any way he can ever beat any of the offensive wrestlers at the top of the divisions in which he can compete? Second, more important question, will you ever continue the Filthy Casuals Guide to Sakuraba? I thought it would be a continuing series because you called the first one the Kimura, but you haven't done any more yet. Perhaps leg kicks next? After all, that is how he got Royce Gracie to quit under the rules demanded by Royce. That shit was and always will be legendary. Be well, stay safe, and Valentina bless from Ben. Cheers, Ben. The Sakuraba thing, I've got what I'm going to do planned out. I've just not done it yet because the process of harvesting clips and putting them together and stuff is not the rewarding part. The rewarding part is, once I've got it planned out, it's not that exciting. It's when I've got a new idea, I'm like, oh yeah, let's do that, and I just sort of push it through. I will do the Sakuraba stuff when there's not a lot going on. That's probably what's going to happen. I mean, I did that right at the start of the lockdown just to test my video editing chops and improve them. And if you notice that one, the Tony Ferguson one, Dustin 3.0, anyway, even the last one actually, there's always I'm trying to improve some aspect of the video editing process and all that, which is why it's annoying that the audio was letting it down. But yes, if you want a taster of what the parts were going to be, it was going to be part one was the Kimura, part two was probably going to be, I was working out how to do it in 4 parts, but there was going to be a takedowns section, obviously, but then we were going to talk about how he used retreats to set up his level changes, and then how he used retreats to also set up punches when people expected level changes, like the great examples of him dropping like Vandy in their second fight. He's going straight back, and where he had been dropping on the legs every time Vanderlei came in swinging, he just swung back and knocked Vandy down and stuff like that. And then we were going to talk about the striking and how he pioneered the back kick as a ring cutting weapon, which is something that no one was really doing in MMA. And we were going to talk about the arm bar at some point, because obviously the Kimura was a huge part of that, the double wrist lock, whatever you want to call it. But the arm bar is how he got most of his finishes. I think he might have the most arm bar finishes ever, unless there's some like weird regional scene act. But it's him and Rousey and people like that who are just specialists, or Paulo Filho, obviously, who are just specialists in the arm bar and finished a load of people with arm bars. And then we're going to talk about some weird like catch tactics. He's very good at the turning neck crank. He finished a couple of guys with that in his later career. Going to talk about the other one was the war versus the guard, which is an article I wrote at Fightland a while ago, because Sakuraba, there's this weird tendency to remember him as like if you ever say he's a bad guard passer, people go, this guy cartwheeled over the Gracie's guards, and like, do you ever remember him succeeding on a cartwheel guard pass? No, he was not a great guard passer. He was a meat and potatoes guard passer. He used to hit like over-under passes, under passes, classical old school guard passes that you would learn in judo, and then he really struggled when guys kicked him out to standing. And that's why he ended up doing all that showboating stuff, kicking the legs, jumping over people's guards, doing all that stuff, because Vitor Belfort, Alan Goes, people like that found that if they kicked him out to standing and stayed on their back, he really couldn't do anything. So that's why he ended up, the reason that no one else was doing all that stuff standing over their opponents was that they didn't get pushed into those positions. But these Brazilian guys worked out that he had a lot of trouble passing the guard, so they just kept him out there. So Sakuraba versus the guard is always an interesting subject, and I think that would have been part 3 or part 4 or whatever. But yes, those will come. I'll do those at some point. Regarding RDA, yeah, his problem is, I mean, someone put up a photo of the size difference between him and his last 4 opponents, where he just got, completely shown up. But he shouldn't have been fighting at welterweight in the first place. He's always the one that people bring up when they want a 165-pound division or whatever, or 162-pound division, whatever's between 170 and 155. I think it's probably, he's got a couple of problems. The problems are the size he was having trouble with at welterweight, and then the wrestling. He's not the best wrestler in the world. He's very much relying on his ring positioning and setting up his takedowns with strikes. He's very, very good on the feet for someone who took up striking later in his career, and that allows him to set up little level changes, drive to the fence and things. I think, when you watched him against Habib, he'd shoot these takedowns and get thrown by the whizzer, and I suspect that would have happened against Makhachev, because Makhachev is great off the whizzer, which is another prerequisite of being able to do that casting punch to create clinches. What I would love to see from RDA is being able to push people to the fence with the double leg, with the head by the hips and stuff, not putting himself in danger by dropping on a single and getting uchi-matted, but coming up using the underhook and the head post and starting to beat people up standing, being able to free his hands and hit the body and stuff like that. Because he was always a great body hitter, but you really need to get to it a lot to produce finishes, and the odd body kick and the odd body punch to create clinches and to duck in on the hips, not as useful as getting in on the hips, driving them back to the fence, coming up, freeing your hands and banging the body. I'd love to see him using that sort of strategy, the John Jones versus Glover, or DC1, that fight. Nate Diaz versus Conor McGregor. Fabio Maldonado did it a little bit, actually. But push people to the fence and then use that to land body blows and elbows and things upstairs. I think he's got the tools to be an amazing dirty boxer. I just think he's focused on striking and takedowns. And the other thing about dirty boxing is that it's a wonderful way to slow down and to make up for a lot of shortcomings that you're having from slowing down with age. Cheers, Ben. Hi, Jack. I'm Joachim. Good luck pronouncing that one. Ha ha. Excuse me. I talk about Joachim Hansen every other week. I'm 15 and I'm from New Zealand. Oh, so it's Joachim. Joachim? I don't know. Question mark on the end of Joachim. 2 days ago, I had my second novice kickboxing bout, and late in the first round, I got teeped to the bladder. Which, 1, hurt like a bitch, but 2, made me remember an old podcast you did where you mentioned somebody doing this. This might have been last week I said that, or 2 weeks ago. Is it a legitimate technique, and do you know of any good examples of fighters using it effectively? Thanks, Jack. Love your content and your jokes about Shevchenko and Busasi. Thiago Santos' knees bless. Teeps to the bladder, very legit. The person you're thinking of is Skarbowski, who put out a great little instructional series on BJJ Fanatics, or Dynamic Striking, I think it's called, their other website. Well, here's the way to know if it's legit. Did it hurt you? Yes. Did the referee call it? No. Yes, it's a legit technique. Hi, Jack. Huge fan of the podcast and your writing. Since I discovered an article about the lever punch years ago, that is a long time ago. I don't even know if I've used that expression in a while. I just use doubling up because it's easier. My question is, what are the key skills that someone needs to have to be considered an effective pressure fighter? Someone like Rod Tang is incredible to me for always moving forward, but is his unique ability to take a punch one of the required abilities of a pressure fighter? From Jack, another Jack. I think with pressure fighting, it's an odd one because it's very easy to forget that this is fighting. If you can get hit in the head harder than the other guy, but you can take it better than he takes your punches, then you're effectively pressure fighting when you're walking forward towards him. There are a lot of skills to make yourself a more technical pressure fighter. You need to be able to move your head and avoid punches and then come in on counters, or you need to be able to smother the opponent's hands with your own hands, or you need to physically push them back with push kicks and things, or you need to get them standing still with low kicks, or get them to pick up their legs and come in with punches like that. There are a lot of ways to improve your effectiveness as a pressure fighter, but to be an effective pressure fighter, you just need to keep the pace high and outwork the opponent. I think one of the keystones of being a great pressure fighter is cardio, but even then, Conor McGregor was an amazing pressure fighter until the fights got late, and then he suddenly wasn't. Pressure fighting is at its core about running people ragged. As long as they're... I mean, you can be working more than them and tire them out, but as long as they're working enough to tire them out so that you can finish them in the time, or so that they're ineffective in the later rounds, I think you're being successful as a pressure fighter. But there are pressure fighters with tons of skills, there are pressure fighters with just, move forward and take blows on the head. I think, it's like anything in fighting. Take a raw talent and teach him a load of skills that make him more effective in applying that, and he'll probably have a longer and healthier career. But in terms of required skills, they're very, very few. Take a punch and give a punch. That's all you need to do to be an effective pressure fighter, as long as you can stay there and keep making that happen. Hey Jack, long-time listener and Patreon boy. One thing I've struggled with is anxiety before BJJ training. I have a bit of social anxiety, and the thoughts of going to drill with someone unknown sends my adrenaline through the roof. I love training BJJ and try to remind myself of this to get over these feelings, but even after training for around 2 years, I still have these feelings before sessions and can't seem to shake them. Have you heard of this being common, and any advice how to shake it? Keep up the good work, from Dean. Yes, I've heard of it. I have it. And I know multiple actual badasses who feel similar things. They just get... And it's not... Well, anxiety is a strange thing because, it doesn't... You can think in your head and go, that doesn't make any sense. And that is what anxiety is. Some days you will just be quite anxious and you'd be like, I don't know why. But I know some guys who've gone on to be quite successful, and they'll say, you have a candid conversation with them. Obviously, have to get to know them quite well first, but they've said to me, some days I'll get out of my car outside of the gym and won't even want to go in, And I think building it up to be horrible can do that for you. But most of these people know that they love training when they get there. It's just, it's one of those things. And particularly, I found this, the longer I wait between training sessions, if I take a week off or I miss a few sessions or something like that, it gets a lot harder for me to go back. And the same is true, with regular gyms. I don't know why. It's just I don't want to be the newbie there or the outsider or whatever. Well, if you train, every day for a few days, suddenly I'm like, well, everyone here trains less often than me. This is my house. Anxiety is a strange thing, and I think the only way to cure it is you've got to push yourself through it a couple of times, and then it'll get a lot easier. And also get to know people. If you're worried about drilling with people you don't know in the gym, and provided that's not I'm worried people are going to injure me or something like that. If you get to know the people in your gym, you will always have a good stable of people that you can train with. And obviously, I'm not saying avoid training with other people, but you will always be the person who feels like they're at home, rather than new people who are walking through the door. Because that is a thing whenever you go to a new gym. I've been to a lot of gyms around the world, and it is always weird being the person who's the outsider, and they'll be showing something or drilling something, and someone will make a joke, and it's an in joke, and you're like, oh, okay, well, I'm not from here. But if you're the person who's the insider, it makes... Basically, I'm saying make the gym as much like your home as you can. Make it your stomping ground. Make it somewhere Makes it a lot easier. And I think with everything, particularly BJJ, one of the easiest ways to overcome anxiety is to train lots, because then, and this is anxiety, a different sort of anxiety, not social anxiety, but anxiety over rolling, which is what a lot of people get. The more often you're there, the less each roll matters. By the grand scheme of things. If you're rolling, if you roll once a week and you're doing most places don't do 10-minute rounds, but if you're doing, 5-minute rounds, but if you're doing 6 5-minute rounds, so that's half an hour of rolling. If you go once a week, that's your lot. But if you go 3 times a week, you're getting an hour and a half of rolling in. You go 5 times a week, so on and so forth. So one 5-minute segment doesn't matter as much. And that's not working out the maths in your head, but just you will be fine training with people. You'll go oh, well, if I get crushed, doesn't matter. I'll just work on what I'm working on. Whereas if you train once a week or twice a week, every time you start rolling, you're oh, what do I do here? You're thinking how do I best engage these grips and stuff, and it becomes very high pressure. Whereas if you're rolling every day or nearly every day or whatever, you go, cool, you do whatever you're going to do, and then I'll fight back from there. Certainly that's what's helped me, get to a situation where where each roll isn't important, so you're not going to be arsing around trying to get the right grips before you even start. Get to the situation where you can just comfortably roll for 4 or 5 rounds, go home, be what went well today, and then go in the next day. That's the ideal. And I'm obviously saying that to someone with anxiety isn't going to help, but It literally is just keep showing up. Keep showing up. Keep talking to people while you're there, or make the odd joke or whatever, and ingratiate yourself with people. But it's like any skill is like what was it Funakoshi, the karate guy, used to say, like karate's a pot of boiling water, and you keep needing to apply heat. The same is true of any combat sports skill. Needs constant training to stay sharp, but even the act of doing it, the more you're doing it, the more comfortable it is, the more ho-hum it is, the more you are. If it's just something that's part of your routine that you always do, it's not a big deal, and then you just walk through the door and you're there. It's repetition. Repetition is the key with everything. And there's a lot of talk of like getting outside your comfort zone, but make the training place your comfort zone. Be there a lot and just be like, yeah, this is where I hang around. It makes it a lot easier. Cheers, Dean. Right, I reckon that'll do us for today. I'm going to be working on some Valentina Shevchenko stuff, some legitimate, serious Valentina Shevchenko analysis. That's going to be going up for the Patreon boys. Because I missed my podcast last week, I put a link to one of the articles in the Boy Vault for everyone to go and read, the Andy Risty one. If you don't know who Andy Risty is, doesn't matter. The important point is all about generating power with your punches off kicks, and how he used his like absolutely chaotic footwork to undo very, very good defensive fighters like Georgia Petrosian. So if you want to support the podcast, get in on the extra stuff, read the Valentina simp piece coming later this week, and fund my expensive new audio equipment, please join the Patreon. If you want to send an email to the podcast, fightsconbypodcast@gmail.com. And if you want to read what I'm writing at any time, fightprimer.com. I'm your boy Jack Slack, desperately waiting for the Pfizer vaccine to fix these cards. Cheers.